While Titanic's 705 survivors were en route to New York, White Star Line sent the cable ship Mackie Bennett out from Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was loaded with ice and empty coffins, and its mission was to look for human remains. Although there had not been enough lifeboats for everyone on board Titanic, there had been no shortage of life belts. They kept people afloat, even after death. The bodies Mackie Bennett found were floating vertically, as if standing, and looked as if they were asleep. The bodies were hauled out of the sea and placed on the foredeck. Each corpse was checked for identification and then either embalmed or, if it had decomposed too much for embalming, buried at sea. All of the identified bodies of first-class passengers were carried back to shore. Weights were attached to the 116 other bodies, which were then buried at sea. Autopsy showed that almost all of the victims had died of exposure to the cold water rather than drowning. A log of the dead was created to catalogue the items found on the victims' bodies. Among the bodies that were recovered was that of the most famous of Titanic's victims, John Jacob Astor. His corpse was crushed and covered with soot. As a result, it was assumed that Titanic's forward funnel had collapsed on top of him. In his pockets were his watch, stopped at $2.20, and $2,500 in cash. Mackie Bennett returned to Halifax with its gruesome cargo. There, a morgue was set up in an ice rink. Other ships followed, but each brought back fewer and fewer human remains. Wind and bad weather were scattering the bodies, making them difficult to locate. Finally, after only 306 bodies had been found, the organized search was abandoned. In addition to bodies, a deck chair and pieces of oak woodwork were found floating in the water. The most surprising discovery was made on May 13th. Titanic's collapsible A was found some 200 miles from the site of the collision, still afloat, with 3 cadavers as passengers. Back in April, on the morning of the accident, Officer Lowe had observed the collapsible A was sinking and had unloaded the survivors from it. The collapsible had nevertheless remained floating for nearly a month. Marcel Navratil was on the ship that made this gruesome discovery. She was traveling to New York to pick up her sons Edmund and Michel. After their rescue, the 2 boys had been taken care of by first-class survivor Margaret Hayes. She spoke French, but was unable to get the Titanic orphans, or waifs as the press dubbed them, to explain who they were. Mrs. Navratil hadn't even known that her children and estranged husband were on the Titanic until she read about the waifs in a newspaper in France. The majority of Titanic's 1,500 victims remained lost at sea. Unfortunately for the transatlantic tourist industry, these bodies continued floating as they decomposed. They were sighted by passing ships as late as June of that year. A letter sent to President Taft told of an incident in which a ship had run over victims' remains, knocking them several feet into the air.